My name is Sarah Mitchell, and I learned something important about assumptions at 35,000 feet last Tuesday. What started as a simple business trip to New York became the day I stopped hiding who I really was and discovered that sometimes the people who judge you the harshest are the ones who know you the least. I was running late for my 6 a.m. flight from Portland to JFK, which wasn't unusual. Managing 4 coastal wellness retreats across Oregon means my schedule is always packed, but this trip was different. I was flying to New York to finalize the acquisition of a luxury spa facility in the Hamptons, a deal I'd been working on for 18 months. I grabbed my weathered canvas tote bag, the same one I'd carried since opening my first retreat center in Cannon Beach, and rushed through security in my standard work attire, yoga pants, comfortable sneakers, and a fleece jacket with Haystack Rock Wellness embroidered on the chest. Not exactly first-class fashion, but when you're leading sunrise meditation sessions at 5 a.m., practicality beats style. As I hurried down the jet bridge, I pulled out my phone to check my boarding pass one more time. Seat 2A. First class. The upgrade had been automatic, a perk of flying over 150,000 miles a year for business, though I rarely dressed the part of a frequent business traveler. The plane was already boarding when I reached the gate. I handed my ticket to the flight attendant, a professional-looking woman with kind eyes named Jessica according to her name tag. The flight attendant welcomed me aboard and confirmed my seat assignment. I made my way down the aisle, looking forward to a few hours of quiet work before the chaos of New York meetings. But as I approached row 2, I stopped short. A woman was sitting in my seat. She was maybe 45, impeccably dressed in what looked like designer everything, tailored blazer, expensive jewelry, and perfectly styled blonde hair. She had claimed both seats in the row, spreading her Louis Vuitton purse across 2B and settling into 2A like she owned the plane. When I politely indicated that she was in my assigned seat, she looked up from her phone with the kind of expression you'd give a particularly annoying insect. Her eyes took in my yoga pants, my practical shoes, my slightly frazzled appearance from rushing through the airport. She dismissed my claim with barely a glance at my boarding pass, suggesting I belonged in the back of the plane. Her voice dripped with condescension as she explained that this was first class, noting that the seat cost $3,200, probably more than I made in a month, according to her assessment. I felt my face flush, but I kept my voice calm as I insisted this was definitely my assigned seat. By now, other passengers were backing up behind me, and I could feel their impatient stares. The woman in my seat seemed to relish the attention. She spoke louder now so the whole cabin could hear, expressing certainty that I was confused about airline seating policies. She gestured dismissively at my fleece jacket, suggesting I might be a cleaning lady or perhaps a nurse, but that this section was for business professionals, people who actually belonged here. When I quietly mentioned that I was a business owner, she laughed, actually laughed, noting my attire and asking if I ran some kind of yoga studio. She said it like it was the most ridiculous thing she'd ever heard, adding that yoga instructors don't fly first class and this section was for real professionals. The humiliation burned in my chest. Around us, other first-class passengers were watching the scene unfold. Some looked uncomfortable, others seemed entertained by the drama. I heard whispers and saw phones being raised to record. She continued her lecture, announcing that she was Catherine Brennan, senior partner at Brennan & Associates, one of Portland's top law firms. She was flying to New York to close a $75 million development deal. That was important work, unlike deciding which meditation music to play. Catherine Brennan. I knew that name, though I couldn't immediately place where I'd heard it. Suddenly, her arrogance made more sense. She was used to being the most important person in any room. When I persisted about needing my seat, she declared the situation ridiculous and called for a flight attendant. Jessica appeared at my elbow, her professional smile firmly in place. Catherine spoke before I could, explaining that there had been some computer error and that I needed to be moved to coach where I belonged. Jessica checked my boarding pass against her passenger manifest, then informed Catherine that she was actually assigned to seat 4B, while I was correct about 2A being my seat. Catherine's face flushed red as she insisted this was impossible, claiming she'd specifically requested an aisle seat in the first row and would never book a middle seat. Jessica diplomatically offered to check with the gate agent while consulting her records. During this pause, Catherine turned her attention back to me, hissing that this was my fault, that I'd probably complained to get an upgrade I didn't pay for. She demanded to know if I had any idea who she was, claiming she could buy and sell me 10 times over. I quietly acknowledged that she probably could. I was exhausted from leading a 3-day corporate retreat and just wanted to sit down and review my presentation for the New York meeting. She continued her tirade, suggesting I take whatever seat they offered in the back and leave the first-class cabin to people who actually earned the right to be there. She emphasized that family connections mattered in business. Her grandfather had been one of the founding partners of the firm. Sarah returned with the captain, a distinguished-looking man with silver hair named Captain Davis. Catherine immediately shifted to charm mode, introducing herself as Catherine Brennan from the prominent Portland law firm, suggesting we could resolve this quickly since they'd done legal work for the airline. Captain Davis checked his tablet and confirmed that I was indeed assigned to 2A while Catherine belonged in 4B. When Catherine protested about her Platinum Elite status and 200,000 annual miles, the captain explained that seat assignments were based on availability and upgrade priority, and that I appeared to have higher status than she did. This was news to me. I knew I flew frequently for business, but I'd never paid attention to my frequent flyer status. Catherine's mouth fell open as she stared at my yoga attire, clearly unable to reconcile my appearance with superior airline status. Captain Davis then revealed information that stunned everyone within earshot. I was apparently Global Services Elite, the airline's highest tier, having flown over 400,000 miles in the past year alone. Moreover, the crew had been specifically briefed about my presence on board. The captain continued, explaining that I owned the largest wellness retreat network on the West Coast and was a world-renowned expert in corporate stress management who consulted for Fortune 500 companies. I was traveling to New York for a major business acquisition that would expand my retreats to the East Coast. I stared at him, wondering how he knew all these details. He must have seen my confusion because he smiled and explained that their crew briefings included information about VIP passengers. It turned out I'd helped the airline CEO's wife recover from severe burnout the previous year, a month-long intensive program at my Cannon Beach facility that likely saved her marriage and career. Suddenly I remembered. Margaret Davis had been one of my most challenging clients, suffering from executive burnout, so severe she was having panic attacks during board meetings. Her husband had flown her to my retreat as a last resort before she resigned from her executive position. Catherine was staring at me like I'd suddenly grown a second head, whispering my name as recognition dawned. Her voice cracked as she asked if I was the Sarah Mitchell who had helped Margaret Davis. The irony was overwhelming. This woman who'd just spent 10 minutes telling me I didn't belong in first-class worked for a firm that had done legal work for my business expansion. Captain Davis's voice turned considerably cooler as he informed Catherine that she needed to move to her assigned seat. When she protested about needing an aisle seat for laptop work, Jessica noted that 4B was a middle seat, but offered to move her to coach if she preferred an aisle seat there. The blood drained from Catherine's face at the mention of coach. She insisted she couldn't work in coach due to confidential deal documents, so Captain Davis firmly directed her to 4B. As Catherine gathered her belongings, she leaned close to me and whispered an apology, claiming she hadn't known about Margaret or my status. She'd simply assumed based on my appearance. I responded quietly that she'd assumed someone in yoga pants couldn't afford first class and that running wellness retreats made me less professional than being a lawyer. I pointed out that she'd assumed many things without knowing anything about me. She looked genuinely ashamed, admitting she was wrong. But I pressed further, noting that the problem wasn't just her incorrect assumptions about my job or income. It was her belief that those things gave her the right to humiliate someone. As she moved to her middle seat, I finally settled into 2A. Jessica brought me champagne and a warm towel, plus a handwritten note from the captain apologizing for the disruption. She commented quietly that she'd seen many entitled passengers over the years, but had never witnessed someone handle such a situation with such grace. I smiled tiredly, explaining that I spent my days with stressed executives and anxious clients, which taught patience and de-escalation techniques. As the plane took off, I opened my laptop to review the acquisition documents for the New York meeting. The luxury spa facility I was purchasing would allow me to expand my wellness programs to the East Coast, potentially helping thousands more people manage stress and find balance in their lives. About an hour into the flight, Catherine appeared beside my seat, looking smaller and less commanding than before. She asked permission to speak with me, then launched into a proper apology. She acknowledged that her behavior was inexcusable and that she'd made assumptions based on prejudice. Catherine mentioned that Margaret Davis spoke about me frequently, describing me as the person who saved her life and her career. She recounted how Margaret had been on the verge of a complete breakdown before my intervention, praising my innovative approach to executive wellness. She also revealed that Margaret had told her I'd refused payment for the extended treatment program, saying that some healing work was too important to monetize. The family had tried to compensate me for what other facilities quoted at $50,000, but I'd insisted that helping someone find their way back to themselves was payment enough. Catherine admitted that learning about my business success and client relationships made her realize how completely wrong her assumptions had been. She said she needed me to know that her behavior didn't represent who she wanted to be, acknowledging that she'd gotten caught up in status and appearances while forgetting basic human decency. I studied her face, noting what seemed like genuine remorse, but asked a pointed question about whether she'd be apologizing if she hadn't discovered my business success, client connections, and airline status. She was quiet for a long moment before admitting that she probably wouldn't have, that she'd likely still think she was right. When I asked what had changed, she explained that discovering how wrong her assumptions were had forced her to reconsider her entire worldview. I responded that her realization was important, but that it shouldn't matter what I'd accomplished or how much money I made. What should matter was basic respect for another human being, regardless of their appearance or perceived status. Catherine nodded slowly, acknowledging that she judged me based on clothes and assumptions about yoga instructors, which was wrong regardless of who I turned out to be. I emphasized that there were many wellness professionals who worked just as hard, but hadn't had the same opportunities, and they all deserved the same respect. She admitted she'd never considered that perspective, always assigning value based on job titles and perceived income levels. I explained that this approach missed the actual value, a person's character, dedication, and impact on the world. Catherine then made an unexpected offer. Her law firm had a large corporate foundation that supported various causes, and she wondered if my retreat centers would be interested in discussing a partnership to provide stress management programs for nonprofit workers and other underserved populations. I raised an eyebrow, asking if this was guilt-motivated philanthropy. She laughed ruefully, admitting it was partly that but also genuine interest. She'd heard about the burnout crisis among helping professionals and wanted to explore ways to address it. I explained that I already provided about 20% of my services pro bono to teachers, healthcare workers, and nonprofit staff. Catherine asked if I'd be open to exploring ways to expand that work, and I agreed to discuss it, with the caveat that any partnership would need to be based on genuine commitment to wellness rather than making her firm look good. She assured me she understood and thanked me for not dismissing her completely after her behavior, saying she knew she didn't deserve a second chance. I responded that everyone deserves a chance to do better, something I learned from my work, that people don't hold grudges if you treat them with genuine care in the present moment. She smiled genuinely for the first time, suggesting that more people should learn that lesson. As she returned to her seat, I reflected on the morning's unexpected turn of events. The rest of the flight passed quietly. I finalized my presentation for the New York meeting, reviewed contracts for the spa acquisition, and planned the integration of East Coast operations. When we landed at JFK, Catherine approached me one final time. She handed me her business card with a handwritten note, "For Margaret's guardian angel," with sincere apologies and genuine respect. She hoped our foundation conversation represented real interest rather than just guilt, and wished me well with my acquisition. I thanked her and reciprocated good wishes for her development deal. As I walked through JFK toward my waiting car, I thought about the assumptions we both made that morning. She'd assumed someone in yoga attire couldn't afford first class, while I'd assumed her apology was purely self-interested. Perhaps we were both learning that people are more complex than our first impressions suggest. The New York meeting exceeded all expectations. The spa acquisition was finalized, giving my wellness network access to the East Coast market and cutting-edge therapeutic technologies. As I flew home the next day, again in first class, this time without drama, I found an email from Brennan and Associates. It was a formal proposal for a partnership to fund wellness programs for nonprofit workers and underserved professionals, with a suggested annual commitment of $750,000. The proposal was more comprehensive than I dared hope, including mental health support, stress management training, and sabbatical programs. Catherine had added a personal note. "Thank you for teaching me something important about respect and assumptions. Margaret would be proud to know her advocate is helping even more people find their way back to themselves." I smiled as I drafted my response accepting the partnership proposal. Sometimes the most difficult encounters teach us the most valuable lessons, and occasionally the person who starts as your harshest critic becomes your most unexpected ally. 2 weeks later, I was back in my usual routine: morning meditation sessions at the Cannon Beach Retreat, afternoon stress management workshops in Portland, and evening planning sessions for the East Coast expansion. I'd almost forgotten about the airplane incident until my assistant, Emma, buzzed my office. A woman had arrived with her teenage daughter, claiming a connection to Margaret Davis and asking about our corporate wellness programs. When I agreed to see them, Catherine walked in looking completely different from our first encounter. Gone was the designer suit and perfect styling. Instead, she wore jeans and a simple sweater, her hair pulled back in a practical ponytail. Beside her stood a girl of about 15 with bright eyes and an earnest expression. The teenager introduced herself as Lily Brennan, explaining that Mrs. Davis was her mother's client and had told them about my work. She mentioned struggling with anxiety about college applications and wondered if I offered programs for young people. Catherine looked embarrassed as she explained that Lily had been experiencing severe academic stress, with panic attacks during tests despite her excellent grades. Their family doctor had suggested stress management counseling, but Lily had specifically asked to meet me after hearing Margaret's stories. Lily elaborated on her symptoms with surprising self-awareness, describing sleep problems, constant worry about perfectionism, and pressure to maintain her 4.0 GPA while participating in multiple extracurricular activities. She worried that her stress was affecting her family relationships and her ability to enjoy activities she used to love. I recognized the patterns immediately: classic overachiever burnout that I saw frequently among high-performing students. After discussing her situation for 30 minutes, I was impressed by her insight into her own stress patterns and her willingness to seek help. I explained that we had a specialized program for academic stress management, combining mindfulness techniques with practical study strategies and life balance skills. Lily's face lit up with hope as I described how other students had learned to maintain high performance without sacrificing their mental health. Catherine watched our interaction with an expression I couldn't quite read. When Lily stepped out to explore our meditation garden, Catherine lingered in my office. She thanked me for taking Lily seriously and treating her concerns with respect rather than dismissing teenage stress as normal growing pains. She admitted that watching Lily struggle had forced her to examine her own relationship with perfectionism and success. Catherine revealed that after our airplane encounter, she'd done extensive research about my work, finding articles about innovative stress management techniques and my consulting with Fortune 500 companies. She'd also discovered my research on executive burnout and my teaching at Portland State University's business school. More importantly, she'd realized that her assumptions about success and value had influenced how she was raising Lily. She'd been pushing her daughter toward the same perfectionist standards that had made Catherine so quick to judge others. She admitted that she wanted Lily to understand that true worth came from character and contribution, not from grades and achievements alone. Catherine asked if I'd be willing to work with Lily not just on stress management, but on developing a healthier relationship with success and failure. I agreed to include Lily in our teen leadership program, a comprehensive approach that combined stress management with life skills and values clarification. Catherine's relief was palpable as she scheduled Lily's first session. Over the following months, Lily became one of our most dedicated program participants. She learned meditation techniques that helped with test anxiety, developed better study strategies that reduced her workload, and most importantly, began to see herself as more than her academic achievements. Catherine, meanwhile, had become one of our strongest advocates. The Brennan and Associates Foundation partnership had launched successfully, providing wellness programs for over 200 nonprofit organizations across Oregon. She'd also used her legal expertise to help us navigate complex regulations around our East Coast expansion. 6 months after our airplane encounter, Catherine stopped by my office after dropping off Lily for a weekend retreat program. She wanted to update me on the foundation's impact and discuss expanding the partnership to Washington and California. But she also shared something more personal. Lily had been accepted to her first-choice college with a partial scholarship, but more importantly, she learned to balance achievement with well-being. She no longer had panic attacks and had developed interests beyond academic performance. Catherine credited my influence with helping both of them develop healthier perspectives on success and failure. She said Lily had learned that real accomplishment meant growing as a person, not just accumulating achievements. She paused, watching through the office window as Lily led a meditation session for younger participants in our teen program. Catherine admitted that the airplane incident had forced her to confront uncomfortable truths about her own values and prejudices. She'd built her identity around being the most successful person in any room, which made her defensive and judgmental toward anyone who seemed different. But watching my approach to business and success, focusing on impact rather than image, had shown her a different model. She'd realized that true leadership meant lifting others up rather than putting them down to feel superior. As if summoned by our conversation, Lily appeared in the doorway, glowing with the satisfaction that comes from helping others. She'd just finished teaching breathing techniques to a group of middle schoolers struggling with social anxiety. She reported excitedly that one of the younger students had experienced her first panic-free day in months after practicing the techniques they'd learned. Lily's pride came not from her own achievement, but from contributing to someone else's healing. I praised her natural teaching ability and her genuine care for the younger students. Lily beamed, then shared news about her college plans. She decided to double major in psychology and business, with the goal of bringing wellness programs to corporate environments. Catherine looked at her daughter with obvious pride, noting how much Lily had grown in confidence and compassion. As they prepared to leave, Lily gave me an unexpected hug, thanking me for helping her see that success meant being true to yourself rather than meeting other people's expectations. After they left, I reflected on the unexpected journey that had started with a confrontation in first class. Catherine's assumptions about me had been wrong, but they'd forced me to articulate my own values and defend my worth. Lily's struggles had reminded me why I'd chosen this work in the first place. Their transformation had shown me that growth was possible even in the most unlikely circumstances, and that sometimes the people who challenge us most end up teaching us the most valuable lessons. My phone buzzed with a text from Lily. "Thank you for showing me that being successful means helping others succeed too." I texted back, "You've got it exactly right. See you next weekend." The next morning, I was back in first class on another business trip, this time to a wellness conference in Denver. As I settled into my seat, 2A again, earned through miles and dedication, I thought about how different this flight felt from that chaotic morning 8 months ago. The young flight attendant approached my seat with a warm smile, introducing herself as Jessica, the same attendant from my previous flight. She mentioned that she'd heard about my foundation work and thanked me for the stress management workshop I provided for airline employees. She shared that several crew members had used the techniques I'd taught during particularly challenging flights, helping them stay calm and better serve passengers. Her genuine appreciation reminded me why this work mattered beyond business success. As the plane took off, I opened my laptop to review my conference presentation about sustainable business practices and wellness industries. I would be speaking about the importance of authentic leadership and the danger of confusing external success with internal worth. My presentation would feature the story of transformation, how a moment of conflict had led to partnership, how assumptions had given way to understanding, and how choosing grace over retaliation had created opportunities for growth that benefited everyone involved. 3 hours later, standing before an audience of wellness professionals and business leaders, I concluded my presentation with these words. 8 months ago, a woman told me I didn't belong in first class because I was wearing yoga pants. She assumed that running wellness retreats meant I couldn't afford a premium seat, that my work was somehow less important than her corporate law career. She was wrong on all counts, but her assumption taught me something valuable. I clicked to my final slide, which showed a photo of Lily leading a meditation session for younger students, her face radiant with purpose and joy. It taught me that we all make assumptions about worth and value and belonging, but true worth isn't measured by the clothes we wear or the titles we hold. It's measured by the positive impact we make and the growth we inspire in others. This 15-year-old understands that better than most adults. The audience was silent, engaged. The woman from the airplane became one of our strongest partners, and her daughter became one of our most inspiring students. When we choose to educate rather than retaliate, when we respond to judgment with grace, we create opportunities for transformation that extend far beyond the original conflict. The applause was warm and sustained. After the presentation, several conference attendees approached me to discuss establishing similar partnership programs with their organizations. But the conversation that resonated most came from Dr. Michael Thompson, a recent psychology graduate who looked nervous about starting his first job at a corporate wellness firm. He thanked me for my presentation, admitting that he'd been worried about being taken seriously because of his young appearance and unconventional background. He'd been considering trying to project more authority, But my story had made him realize that authenticity was more powerful than artifice. I encouraged him to focus on being the best professional he could be rather than trying to look like what people expected. Competence and genuine care mattered more than appearance, and clients responded to authentic expertise rather than projected authority. He smiled with renewed confidence, thanking me for the reminder that true leadership came from service rather than status. He hoped to someday create the kind of positive impact I described, helping people find balance and purpose in their professional lives. Flying home from Denver, I reflected on how that morning confrontation in first class had become a defining moment for everyone involved. Catherine had learned to question her assumptions about value and worth. Lily had discovered her passion for helping others while developing a healthy relationship with achievement. I had been reminded of the importance of standing up for myself while maintaining dignity and compassion. Most importantly, we had all learned that conflict, handled with wisdom and grace, could become the catalyst for growth and positive change that extended far beyond the original participants. My phone buzzed with a text from Catherine. Lily got the scholarship for her summer psychology internship. She credits your mentorship program with helping her find her calling. Thank you for believing in her potential. I typed back, tell her congratulations and that we're proud of her growth. As the plane began its descent into Portland, I looked out at the Oregon landscape I'd made my home, at the community where I'd built my retreats and my life. Somewhere down there, Lily was probably studying for finals while using the stress management techniques she'd learned. Catherine was likely working on foundation business, using her legal skills to help more organizations provide wellness support for their employees. And hundreds of professionals were living more balanced, purposeful lives because we'd all learned to see beyond our first impressions and work together toward common goals. The airplane incident had started with judgment and ended with partnership. It had begun with assumptions and concluded with understanding. Most importantly, it had transformed a moment of humiliation into a story of hope, proof that people could change, that grace could triumph over pride, and that sometimes the best outcomes came from the most unexpected encounters. As I gathered my belongings and prepared to deplane, I made a mental note to call Lily about a special opportunity. The University of Oregon had just announced a new scholarship program for students interested in combining business with social impact. I had a feeling I knew the perfect candidate. After all, Lily had already proven she belonged anywhere she chose to be, just like the rest of us, once we stopped letting other people's assumptions define our worth. And that lesson, learned at 35,000 feet in a moment of conflict, had changed all our lives for the better. The Cannon Beach Community Center buzzed with energy as I surveyed the crowd gathering for our annual Wellness and Leadership Summit. What had started as a small local event had grown into a 3-day conference attracting wellness professionals, business leaders, and community advocates from across the Pacific Northwest. I adjusted my microphone and looked out at the audience of nearly 500 people. In the front row, I spotted familiar faces that told the story of how one airplane confrontation had rippled outward to touch countless lives. Catherine sat with her law firm's pro bono team, preparing to present their expanded foundation work. Beside her, Lily, now a freshman at University of Oregon, wore the confident smile of someone who'd found her purpose early. Behind them, Dr. Michael Thompson had brought a delegation from his corporate wellness firm, which had become one of our key training partners. But the face that made me smile most was unexpected. In the third row sat Margaret Davis, the airline CEO's wife whose recovery from burnout had started this entire chain of events. She'd become one of our most vocal advocates, speaking publicly about executive mental health and funding research into workplace stress management. I began my opening keynote with a story the audience had heard variations of before, but never in its complete form. I described that morning in first class, the assumptions and judgments, the moment of humiliation that became a catalyst for growth. The audience was captivated as I traced the connections forward. How Catherine's initial prejudice had forced her to examine her own values. How her daughter's stress had led to breakthrough programs for teen wellness. How their law firm's foundation had expanded from Oregon to fund wellness initiatives across 12 states. I clicked to a slide showing statistics from our partnership impact. Over 15,000 nonprofit workers had received stress management training, 200 organizations had implemented wellness programs, and workplace burnout rates among participating companies had dropped by 35%. But the numbers only told part of the story. During the conference break, I was approached by Elena Rodriguez, a young woman who looked familiar but whom I couldn't immediately place. She reminded me that we'd met briefly at last year's summit, where she'd been Catherine's legal assistant. Elena had been struggling with severe work-related anxiety, putting in 80-hour weeks while battling imposter syndrome in the competitive legal environment. Elena explained that after witnessing Catherine's transformation and hearing about our programs, she'd enrolled in our professional development track. The combination of stress management techniques and values clarification had changed her perspective entirely. Rather than leaving law altogether, Elena had found her niche in nonprofit legal advocacy. She'd recently joined a firm specializing in workers' rights, using her legal skills to fight workplace exploitation while maintaining her own well-being through the techniques she'd learned. What struck me most was Elena's confidence. The anxious, overwhelmed assistant had become a poised advocate who spoke passionately about using legal expertise to protect vulnerable workers. She credited our program with helping her see that career success didn't require sacrificing mental health. Elena introduced me to her colleague, James Park, a former tech executive who'd attended our corporate burnout recovery program after a stress-induced heart attack at age 35. James had left his high-pressure Silicon Valley job and moved to Portland, where he now ran a nonprofit connecting stress professionals with career transition resources. James's story exemplified the kind of transformation our programs aim to create. Instead of simply returning to his previous lifestyle, he'd used his business skills to address the systemic issues that had nearly destroyed his health. His organization had helped over 300 professionals transition from high-stress careers to more sustainable paths. During the afternoon panel on sustainable success models, I watched Catherine present alongside Elena and James. The contrast with the woman who'd tried to eject me from first class was remarkable. Catherine spoke humbly about her journey from status-obsessed lawyer to values-driven advocate. She described how examining her own prejudices had led to broader questions about the legal profession's culture. Her firm had implemented flexible work arrangements, mental health support, and pro bono requirements that aligned with attorneys' personal values rather than just billing targets. The audience was particularly engaged when Catherine discussed the moment she realized her competitive drive had been masking deep insecurity. She'd been so focused on appearing successful that she'd lost sight of what success actually meant to her. Lily followed her mother's presentation with one of her own, speaking about student wellness advocacy. Now majoring in psychology and business, she'd founded a peer support network at University of Oregon that had expanded to 6 other campuses. Her presentation included research she'd conducted on academic stress, showing how mindfulness training and values clarification significantly reduced anxiety among high-achieving students. The confidence and clarity with which she spoke reminded me why I'd believed in her potential from our first meeting. After Lily's presentation, I was approached by Dr. Jennifer Walsh, an education professor who'd been following our teen wellness work. She'd recently received a grant to study stress prevention programs in high schools and wanted to discuss adapting our methods for younger students. Dr. Walsh explained that academic pressure was affecting children as young as 10, with anxiety and depression rates skyrocketing among elementary students. She believed our approach, combining stress management with identity development, could be adapted for school settings. Her enthusiasm was infectious as she described pilot programs in 3 Oregon school districts. Early results showed that students who learned mindfulness and values clarification techniques maintained better academic performance while reporting significantly lower stress levels. The conversation sparked an idea that had been percolating since the conference began. What if we could create a comprehensive approach to stress prevention that started in elementary school and continued through professional development? A systematic way to help people build resilience before they reach crisis points? That evening's networking dinner provided the perfect opportunity to explore this vision. I found myself at a table with Margaret Davis, Catherine and Lily Brennan, Dr. Walsh, and several other key partners who'd become part of our extended community. Margaret shared updates on her company's wellness initiatives, which had become a model for other corporations. Employee satisfaction scores had increased dramatically since implementing our stress management programs, while productivity remained high. Proof that well-being and performance weren't mutually exclusive. She also revealed something I hadn't known. The airline industry had been studying our approach to conflict resolution and customer service training. The way their crew had handled my situation with Catherine had become a case study in de-escalation techniques that preserved dignity for all parties involved. Catherine jumped in with news about the Foundation's latest project, a partnership with the Portland Public School District to provide wellness education for teachers, and administrators. Educator burnout was reaching crisis levels, but early intervention programs were showing promising results. Dr. Walsh added that her research was attracting national attention, with education departments in 5 states requesting information about implementing similar programs. The potential for widespread impact was becoming clear. Lily, meanwhile, had been quietly taking notes throughout the conversation. When prompted to share her thoughts, she surprised everyone with a comprehensive vision for integrated wellness education. She'd been researching successful intervention models and believed we could create a pipeline approach. Elementary programs focused on emotional regulation, middle school curricula addressing identity development, high school courses on stress management and life planning, and college/professional programs for ongoing skill development. Her proposal included teacher training components, parent education elements, and community support structures. Most impressively, she'd already identified funding sources and potential implementation partners across Oregon. The table fell silent as Lily concluded her impromptu presentation. Margaret was the first to speak, offering to fund a feasibility study through her company's education foundation. Catherine immediately volunteered her firm's legal services for navigating the complex regulatory requirements. Dr. Walsh practically vibrated with excitement, recognizing that Lily had outlined exactly the kind of systematic approach her research supported. She offered to coordinate the academic components and evaluation metrics. As the dinner wound down, I realized we'd just witnessed the birth of something potentially revolutionary. A 19-year-old college student, whose stress journey had started with test anxiety, had articulated a vision for transforming how society approached mental wellness and resilience building. The next morning's sessions took on new energy as word spread about our impromptu planning discussion. Speakers began incorporating references to systematic wellness education, and attendees approached me throughout the day with offers to participate in pilot programs. During my closing keynote, I decided to share this emerging vision with the full audience. I described how individual transformation, like Catherine's journey from prejudice to partnership, could scale into societal change when people work together toward common goals. I outlined Lily's proposed pipeline approach, emphasizing that this wasn't just about stress management, but about helping people develop authentic success metrics and sustainable life practices. The response was overwhelming, with organizations throughout the region volunteering to participate in development and testing. But the moment that brought everything full circle came during the final Q&A session. A woman in the back row raised her hand and identified herself as Captain Patricia Morrison from the airline industry. She explained that she'd been following our work since the incident with Catherine, noting that our conflict resolution approach had influenced airline customer service training across multiple carriers. Crews were now trained to de-escalate situations while preserving dignity for all parties. Captain Morrison then revealed that the airline industry wanted to partner with us on employee wellness programs. Flight crews faced unique stressors, irregular schedules, difficult passengers, safety responsibilities that traditional corporate wellness programs didn't address effectively. Her offer represented another expansion opportunity, but more importantly, it showed how the lessons from that first-class confrontation were continuing to ripple outward in unexpected directions. After the conference ended, I found myself walking along Cannon Beach with Catherine, Lily, and Margaret. The late afternoon sun painted Haystack Rock in golden light as we reflected on the weekend's developments. Catherine marveled at how far we'd all come from that morning on the airplane. She admitted that her initial prejudice had been rooted in her own insecurity about her value and worth. Attacking me had been a way of reinforcing her own status when she felt threatened by uncertainty. Lily added that watching her mother's transformation had taught her important lessons about humility and growth. She learned that true confidence came from knowing your values and living them consistently, not from putting others down to elevate yourself. Margaret shared that her own recovery journey had shown her the importance of authentic leadership. As CEO of a major corporation, she'd realized that her vulnerability about mental health struggles had actually strengthened her relationships with employees and board members. She'd begun speaking publicly about executive burnout, breaking down stigmas that prevented other leaders from seeking help. Her openness had created permission for others to prioritize their well-being without fear of appearing weak or incompetent. As we reached the tide pools near Haystack Rock, I reflected on the unexpected community that had emerged from a moment of conflict. These relationships, built on mutual respect, shared values, and commitment to growth, had become more meaningful than traditional professional networks. Lily suddenly stopped walking and turned to face the group with an expression of excitement and nervousness. She announced that she'd been thinking about the Pipeline Wellness Education project all weekend, and she wanted to propose something ambitious. Rather than waiting until after graduation to get involved, she wanted to take a gap year to help develop and launch the pilot programs. Catherine's initial reaction was concern about interrupting Lily's academic progress, but Lily had clearly thought this through. She explained that several universities offered credit for real-world project development, and this experience would strengthen her eventual graduate school applications. More importantly, she felt called to act on the vision now rather than waiting until she had more credentials. The problems we were addressing, stress, burnout, lack of purpose, were affecting people every day. Waiting 2 more years to help felt like a luxury she couldn't justify. Margaret immediately offered to fund Lily's gap year project, recognizing the kind of initiative and passion that corporate leadership programs tried to cultivate. Catherine, after a moment of maternal worry, expressed pride in her daughter's commitment to meaningful work. As we walked back toward town, I found myself thinking about the airplane passenger who dismissed me as unworthy of first class. That version of Catherine seemed like a different person entirely, someone trapped by narrow definitions of success and worth. The Catherine walking beside me now had learned to see value in unexpected places, to question her assumptions, and to use her privilege to create opportunities for others. Her transformation had been genuine and sustained, touching every aspect of her personal and professional life. That evening, as the conference participants dispersed back to their communities across the Pacific Northwest, I sat in my office reviewing the commitments and connections that had emerged over 3 days. Pilot programs were planned for 12 school districts. Corporate partnerships were being developed with companies throughout Oregon and Washington. The airline industry wanted to collaborate on employee wellness initiatives. And a 19-year-old college student was taking a gap year to help coordinate systematic change in how society approached mental health and resilience. But beyond the programmatic expansion, something more fundamental had occurred. We demonstrated that individual growth could spark collective transformation when people were willing to examine their assumptions and work together despite initial conflicts. My phone buzzed with a text from Catherine. "Thank you for seeing potential in our family when we were at our worst. Lily's decision to take the gap year is scary but right. We trust your guidance." I texted back, "She's going to change the world. We're lucky to be part of her journey." As I prepared to close the office, I noticed an email from an unexpected source, Captain Davis from that first flight. He was writing to inform me that the airline had created an annual award for crew members who demonstrated exceptional conflict resolution skills, and they wanted to name it after me. The Sarah Mitchell Award for Dignified Service would recognize flight attendants and crew members who de-escalated difficult situations while maintaining respect for all passengers. The first recipient was Jessica, the flight attendant who'd handled our seating conflict with such professionalism. Reading Captain Davis's email, I realized that the airplane incident had become something of a legend within the airline industry. Crew members were trained using a case study based on our situation, learning how to address conflicts without humiliating anyone involved. The irony wasn't lost on me that a moment of prejudice and judgment had become a teaching tool for treating all passengers with dignity regardless of their appearance or perceived status. Lily's Gap Year project had exceeded everyone's expectations. Working with Dr. Walsh and a team of graduate students, she developed curricula for 3 age groups and successfully piloted programs in 5 school districts across Oregon. The elementary program, focused on emotional regulation and kindness, had reduced classroom conflicts by 40% while improving academic engagement. Middle school students in the Identity Development Program reported higher self-confidence and clearer future goals. High school participants showed significant decreases in anxiety and depression while maintaining academic performance. But the most impressive results came from the teacher training component. Educators who learned stress management and values clarification techniques reported higher job satisfaction and were significantly less likely to leave the profession during the pilot year. Lily had also coordinated parent education workshops, recognizing that sustainable change required family-wide commitment to wellness principles. These sessions taught parents how to support their children's emotional development while managing their own stress levels. The success had attracted national attention. Education departments in 15 states were requesting information about implementing similar programs, and several universities had offered Lily early admission to their graduate programs in recognition of her innovative work. Catherine had taken a sabbatical from her law firm to support Lily's project full-time, using her legal expertise to navigate complex educational regulations and create sustainable funding models. The experience had strengthened their relationship while allowing Catherine to contribute to meaningful social change. Margaret's company had become the primary corporate sponsor, but she'd also leveraged her business connections to create a coalition of funders committed to systematic wellness education. The financial sustainability that had seemed daunting 6 months earlier was now secured through 2030. Dr. Walsh's research had evolved into a comprehensive longitudinal study tracking student outcomes across multiple metrics. Early data suggested that children who received wellness education showed improved academic performance, better social relationships, and significantly lower rates of anxiety and depression. The airline industry partnership had also flourished beyond expectations. Employee wellness programs had reduced sick leave usage by 25% while improving customer satisfaction scores. Flight crews reported feeling more confident in handling difficult situations, leading to fewer incidents requiring security intervention. Most significantly, the principles we developed were being adapted for other high-stress industries. Healthcare systems, law enforcement agencies, and emergency services were implementing similar programs to address burnout and improve workplace culture. 3 years after that first-class confrontation, I found myself back on a plane to New York, this time for a very different purpose. The United Nations had invited me to speak at their Global Wellness Summit about systematic approaches to mental health and conflict resolution. As I settled into Seat 2A, the same seat number where this journey had begun, I reflected on the unexpected path that had led from a moment of humiliation to international recognition. The flight attendant approached with a warm smile. It was Jessica, now a supervisor who'd been promoted partly based on her exceptional passenger service skills. She'd heard about my UN presentation and wanted to thank me for the training programs that had transformed airline customer service. She shared that the conflict resolution techniques we developed were now used throughout the industry, creating more positive experiences for both passengers and crew members. Incidents of passenger misconduct had decreased significantly as flight attendants learned to address problems while preserving everyone's dignity. During the flight, I worked on my UN presentation, which would focus on how individual transformation could scale into societal change. The airplane incident had become a case study in turning conflict into collaboration, demonstrating that prejudice and misunderstanding could be transformed into partnership and mutual respect. My presentation would argue that many global conflicts stemmed from the same roots as that first-class confrontation: assumptions about worth and belonging, competition for limited resources, and fear of being diminished by others' success. But I would also share the positive outcomes: how Catherine's law firm had expanded their foundation work internationally, how Lily's educational programs were being adapted for refugee communities, how our stress management techniques were helping peacekeeping forces maintain their mental health in challenging environments. The ripple effects had spread far beyond what any of us could have imagined that morning when a woman in expensive clothes told me I didn't belong in first class. As the plane descended into JFK, I thought about the lesson that would anchor my UN presentation: that our response to judgment and prejudice determines whether those moments become sources of division or catalysts for positive change. Catherine's initial assumptions about me had been wrong, but my choice to respond with dignity rather than defensiveness had created space for growth and transformation. That single decision, to educate rather than retaliate, had rippled outward to touch thousands of lives across multiple continents. The airplane confrontation had taught me that true strength lies not in proving others wrong, but in creating opportunities for everyone to do better. And sometimes, the person who starts as your harshest critic becomes your most powerful ally in changing the world. As I gathered my belongings and prepared to address global leaders about wellness and conflict resolution, I smiled at the thought that it all began with a seat in first class that I'd earned the right to occupy, and the grace to transform a moment of prejudice into a lifetime of meaningful partnership.